Let's motor on then and tackle the first discussion topic as voted for by you, Fans Pulse Lap 1. Incidentally, just to cut in, just a reminder, each Sunday night, at some point on a Sunday evening, we will publish on our Facebook page some candidate discussion topics, usually 5 or 6 candidate topics for you to vote on. It takes literally 20 seconds, if that, to click on a link and then select which 2 or 3 discussion topics you would like us to discuss on that week's episode. Job done, your votes are locked in, and that's what we'll pick up and talk about. Thanks to some of you who have done that this week. The first discussion topic this week, let's get into that right now. Fans Pulse Lap 1. Okay, let's get discussing. Like it or not, Speedway is a sport that lends itself to statistics when it comes to building teams and assessing rider capability. I'm talking, of course, about rider averages, which has always been a thing for many decades now in British Speedway. And of course, rider averages are then consolidated to arrive at team averages. With one eye on the future, and we've talked already about the potential of one big league in 2026, etc., we're asking in this conversation, is it time that British Speedway now looks to adopt rider gradings as they do in Denmark, for example? Carol, I'll bring you in first. Is this something, Carol, you've got some insight and knowledge of, and is something that you might support the introduction of?
Yeah, it's been suggested before, and it's how do you give them gradings to them riders, and what format do you use? You know, if you're using 7 riders, you know, how do you grade everyone? What happens if you get a grade? Say you got an F grade rider, which is a reserve. How does he then move into the main body of the team? What happens if you have to replace him through injury? Do you then replace him? Does he get a new grading when are we then working on an average during the season? Because how do you work out who you're bringing in to replace him? If he moves into the main body of the team as an F rider, say, and he gets injured, do you have to then bring another F rider in to replace him? Or does he gain a new average? We're then working on averages and gradings. It can be there has to be an area that you have to work to. So the end of the season, you've got a 7-point rider who is a B average in the championship. A 9-point rider, 9 to 8 is going to be an A. 8 to 7 is going to be a B, however you work it. So you bring them in. You're only allowed one of each and into your team. But if they're having a good season, during that season, do they then work on their averages to build their then grading for the next season? But how does it work during the season? They could go from reserve to number 1 or from number 1 to reserve, as we've seen at Kings Lynn. You've got an A grade rider at number 1, he drops to reserve. Mm-hmm. Does he then become an F grade rider?
Yeah.
If he gets injured, so Bomber started the season at number 1 for Kings Lynn, drops to reserve, he gets injured at reserve in his first meeting, he's an F rider, you then have to bring an F rider in to replace him. For argument's sake, Jordan Jenkins or somebody. It's not the same rider, is it? You're bringing in to replace him. So there's a very grey area of what you do. Do you then bring another A grade rider in because he was an A grade rider? Then it makes it unfair. It's I don't know. It's such a. Obviously, it works in Denmark. I don't know how they do it in Denmark and what system they use, but it can become very confusing if that's how you. And if you had a couple of injuries, how do you replace them? What are we going to do to get them gradings?
Good thinking, Carol. You've gone in a couple of places there that my brain hadn't gone in before. So, I think even I could suggest how that could be handled. I would imagine. And to your point, although we're talking about rider gradings or rider bands, we will continue to actually calculate real averages that kind of underpins all of that. So, but you're right. Let's not solutionize it here, but there will be ways and means to manage the scenario that you just described. Nigel, it's such a frustration. Rider averages were brought in many decades ago. They've kind of served a good purpose. They've helped to, I believe, to ensure that an equalisation of team strengths year on year, which I think is a good concept, right? I wouldn't want Checkbook Speedway to be introduced where the richest clubs can sign all the best riders and win everything every season. I wouldn't want that. So some form of equalisation, I think, is a good concept. But my point is, it can be mightily frustrating when you can't sign the team that you want to sign or the rider you want to sign because of 1/100th of a point statistically prevents that.
But could that not be the same with your grading though as well, Derek? If you have a rider from 8 to 7, exactly like Carl was saying, and you want to sign this rider in 7.01, takes him from a grade C to a B or whatever, however, is that not exactly the same thing there, Derek? I aren't sure. As you rightly say as well, Derek, you'd hate to see Checkbook Speedway, where the one with the biggest checkbook just had all the best riders. The averages seems to work to a degree. We all know over the years, riders have brought their averages down, and even some clubs they'll have an idea who they're going to sign next year. And maybe not so much now because there isn't the money about there was, but certainly years gone by, riders would be paid to keep their average down, knowing they were moving to another club next year, and the deal was already started long before the season finished. I don't know what the answer to it is. Carl hit the nail on the head, what could be a problem. But there again, you said everything can be worked round and fixed, and there are ways round things, and I'm sure there are. What the answer is to it, if we knew the answers, we'd be magicians, wouldn't we? Because there's more than one problem with Speedway at the minute, and what the answers are, I don't know. There's lots of areas need putting right in there, and it's not just one area, lots of areas, and I really don't know. I don't know.
Stuart, let's bring you on in this one. So, the current format is imperfect, right? We've identified some of the imperfections already. Moving to a new proposed grading system, well, there'll be pros and cons like there are with any system or format that you introduced. But there could be to try and support some team. Different teams are built to different strategies, right? Some top end strengths, some are stronger in the middle order, some are stronger at reserves, etc. So there could still be different permutations that are allowed of X number of A band riders and X number of B band riders, etc. So there's different configurations that you could piece together. But I've got one eye on 2026, where if we do go down the one big league route, that's going to put an end to riders doubling up and doubling down. And already I think there's a sense that we might not have enough riders to populate and fulfil all 14, 15 clubs that we currently have. So I'm actually wondering whether adopting the rider grading system, whether that lends itself to spreading riders around a bit more without being too precise about actual numbers or not, or whether it might introduce some new issues that none of us have quite thought of yet. That's a long question, Stuart. Do you see where I'm going with it?
I do, Derek, and one of the viewers had sent a question in earlier on about getting our own house in order first, and that's what we need to do before we start thinking about gradings. I think, like Carl, he's hit the nail on the head. I mean, how do you put Bomber from number 1 to number 7 and then replace him with a Jordan Jenkins or a Anders or whoever you want to call it? I think that the grading situation that they've got in Denmark, I did actually look into it a little bit, and I think it comes from a really young age, because you've got the Swedish and the Danish federations who seem to support the kids from a really like 8, 9, 10, 11, and they get gradings from a younger age. So then when they go into the sort of main body of teams, I'm not sure how they do it, obviously, on that side of it, but the juniors, the younger ones, have gradings there, just to give them a level of obviously experience and talent, if you like. But I think, to mess about with gradings in the UK, I think would be just a very complicated and complex job. It really would be. I think that as it is just now, whoever's invented the 4-point average, the 6-point average, the 8, the 10s, the 12s, hats off to them, because it takes quite a lot to work that out. What I would probably comment on that I would quite like to see is, instead of them having a 12-point average at the top of it, maybe a 10-point average, so lower it a couple of points so that it's 10, as opposed to, because the gulf from a 11.6 say Butanov to a junior or a reserve rider at 2.7 or 3.6, I think bringing the 12 down to 10 would probably be a good thing to do. But as for gradings, I just don't think that they could do it. I really don't. I don't think it would work.
Well, not ready for. I remember. I think I mentioned once before in another conversation. I once had the enjoyment, the honour of spending some time with John Berry, former Ipswich and England team manager, and John. And I haven't checked the history of this or validated it, but I remember John telling me he had quite a role to play, quite a hand to play in introducing rider averages back in the day. I can't remember which year it was, but John told me that it kind of haunted him. It was one of his bigger regrets. He told me that Speedway had followed that particular route. Carol, just to kind of build on the John Berry comment and what Stuart said, it kind of occurs to me that introducing rider gradings, that there are some immediate pros in that space. So, for example, it should, riders aren't going to be locked out of teams because of some numbers, right? So as long as they're in a band of whatever the band is, then they will be fitted into a team. It makes team changes easier. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing from a rider's perspective, but certainly on the negative side, to pick up on something you said earlier, Carol, one of the challenges might be things like that system might be open to flaws around assessed averages, riders returning from injury being correctly graded, etc. And I could see that there could be some anomalies that perhaps the current system doesn't have.
Yeah, Peter Oakes actually, he done a grading system a few seasons back. He was asked to do a grading system for the riders because obviously it was talked about before, and he said it was an absolute nightmare trying to put riders into bands of, and it goes back to, like, say, injured riders coming back or riders that have been out of the country for so long, and he was like, it was so difficult. Do you go on their average from 5 years ago to put them into a band? Well, they're not half the rider they probably are now, and it was like, he said it was just so difficult. He said it was so difficult to do it. Obviously, I think there is a way. Now, the only thing that you would look at is in each band or each grading, A, B, C, whatever it is, what are the averages of that rider within that band? So if your A rider is from argument's sake, a 9 to a 10-point rider, right, but he could be a 9.99, and your band B would go from basically a 7 or an 8 to a 9. Well, he could be an 8.99. So you could get a team built up of 7 of the top riders from the top bands because somebody's paid more money. I'm not saying that it would be a Glasgow or a Poole that are financially securing that match, but somebody along them lines, a Bellevue, could potentially just go, right, they're top of their gradings, we're going to go with them. Okay, when you're building a team, we always used to look at, right, who rides our place the best? Or if he didn't, and I've always been open with when we signed Scotty Nichols was rubbish around Peterborough. Wasn't rubbish, but wasn't his best track. But we signed him for his away form. what he could do on the tighter tracks, the Edinburghs, the Lakesides, the Ipswiches. He would be match winners at them places, so we would look at that. Would you look at that in the same light if it's gradings? Would you go to the top end of that grading and go, right, I want him, and him, and you're going to build the team from, and if you was to look at their averages, their average, if we base a team around say a 42-point average, their team average could potentially be around 50 points. Mm-hmm. And you could have another team that's built a team with the lower end of the scale that could be 40.
Yeah.
So on track, there's a 10-point swing in rider averages. That makes it unfair, then, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So the way you grade is definitely has to be looked at. And again, I'm with the boys. I've been in a position that we've had riders come to us saying that they'll reduce their average to get a team place the next season. Is that what you want from them? Not really. Yes, for the team, we looked at it and gone, that's a good idea for us. Mm-hmm. But you don't want riders dropping averages just to get a team place somewhere else that's going to do somebody else out of a job, when you know full well that you're good enough to be a 6 or 7 point rider. Why drop your average to 5.5 just to force your way into a team because you think you're going to be out of a job? That's not really the way that you want them to be looking at. So it becomes very difficult. The only thing I would say with the riders is I do think reserves at any track should be British riders and they should be protected as British riders. That's my opinion. Like before any grading system, that's what I think is British riders at reserve and protected.
I like that, Carol. You're doing a lot of deep thinking tonight. You really are. You've taken my brain in all sorts of directions that I never considered it going. Listen. We've been running about 15, 16 minutes on this subject, and I suspect we could go much longer on this, much deeper. And we probably need a couple of beers as well, just to help us along. But 360 Speedsters, if you've been watching this debate, listening to it, hopefully within the limited time that we've had, we've kind of surfaced some pros, some potential cons, and I think as we said already, that there's going to be some imperfections with any format, but with enough work on this, I'm sure it could be made to work if there's enough. If the pros outweigh the cons, basically the cost benefit of it. But listen, if we have taken led you in directions that you hadn't thought of, or we haven't encountered anything, we haven't mentioned anything that you thought that we would have, then as ever, please get in touch and share your thinking with us.